All right, well, as promised, here's a quick look at Rey Planeta. I just played through the first turn scenario in the game, which is essentially the first 5 years of King Philip's reign. And as you can see, a bit of the table space takes up a lot of table space, basically, to play it. You've got the main map here, which is where all the action is happening, and I'll go through kind of what happened there. You've also got this sort of player board that represents this should be removed. That represents the number of actions you're going to take, your victory points, your exploration progress, your treasury, and then all the different actions that you can take when you get an action card. And then at the end of the turn, you're going to check your enlightenment, the Spanish court enlightenment, the prestige of the court, and the king's personal happiness, and you potentially get bonuses or penalties on that. Also, what unique events may have happened, as you can see in this first turn of the game. We sent an embassy. We sent an embassy to... Actually, I don't think we sent an embassy. I think we got a card that let us do an embassy to Austria. In any case, I'll get to that. We built a fortress, we built a fleet, and we tried to have a royal heir. We also had to declare bankruptcy. You start the scenario with 10 or 12 ducats. I think it's 10 ducats, and it goes by so fast. You can spend that money so easily, and you don't make a lot back, especially if you are like me and you got pirated in a lot of your overseas colonies. And then in addition to this sort of like player display, you've got the court display, which has got your artists and your nobles and your mistress, who I no longer have, your queen and your valido, your prime minister, essentially, along with your children and a bunch of other stuff. He should be here. Which would have been one additional victory point, I believe. No, that would have been there. Okay. So as you can see, you've got the decks of cards here. You've got events that can come in for various criteria. You've got your generals, and then potentially this guy who was a writer was exiled from my court based on random event. But the whole game is actually played pretty simply. You start with kind of a reorg phase at the beginning of every turn. So if I was going to continue this scenario, we would add all of the turn 2 cards and possible variable event cards. So all the cards have... what turn they come in. Some of these, like these instability cards, are based on certain criteria. Here you can see some different wars. This hunting day is an action you can take. Here we can see Danish intervention starts in turn 1, and if you don't get the event in the first 3 turns, it's removed from the deck. In my game, we actually did get the Danish intervention, and they intervened on the behalf of the Protestant players in the 30 Years' War. So while we were beginning the war in the Palatinate, doing pretty well, it was moved down because the Danish came in. We had to fight them. We got the war in Flanders up here against the Dutch. That was one that was really problematic all turn. I got a lot of cards that activated the Dutch under Nassau, and we had some battles back and forth. And this marker was starting to move towards the war, a Dutch victory over here. So I had to take some campaign actions to move it back, to try and move it back. We also lost a lot of Spanish troops up here, unfortunately, during that war. And this is totally a slog. And I can see how getting involved in a bunch of different wars in this game would be very bad. Not only a drain on the treasury, but an absolute slog in terms of being able to progress any of them. Now, you do have other options besides fighting. You can try and sue for peace, send envoys to try and diplomatically end the war. There's reasons that you would do that. You get half the number of victory points that you would normally get if you do that. But if you start to balloon all over Europe, then it might be necessary. You might just not have the resources to be able to fight it all. And some of the wars are easier to win than others. The war in Flanders has 5 spaces on the track. 4 or 5? Something like 4, I think. These only have 2 in Italy. You can fight against France in 3 different theaters. There's a lot of... I'll talk about it in a minute, but there's a lot of stuff that can happen in this game. But coming back to the game, it's really driven by events. So basically... what you're going to do when you start playing is you're just going to start flipping event cards. So kind of like I Napoleon in that way. You are going to flip a card. So for example, let's say we got this. Here we've got Fall from Grace. Randomly remove a genius from the court and place it in the genius's deck. So this would remove one of your artists from the court. Now on this first turn, I got Diego Velázquez, who's a very, very good artist. He gives you 3 enlightenment points. He's a painter. And, he's a painter and he gives 3 enlightenment points. And I chose during the turn to make him the royal painter. So that actually, this little marker here, he's the royal painter. That actually makes him immune from the Fall from Grace event, so I wouldn't have to do that. And then once we do the event, we just keep going. We flip another event. Here, actions. Okay, so this is where you get to take your actions. And this is how you influence the board. And there's a ton of different actions you can take in the game. There's a player aid that tells you how to use all of these. And these markers represent some actions you can only take once per turn. So as you can see... You can only try and get royal children once a turn. You can only get a new royal mistress once a turn. You can only conduct exploration or build a fortress once per turn. So you're going to put these markers down here to show which ones you've already done, as you can see here. But when you take actions, you're going to get you're going to get 3 actions, and the actions are divided into 4 categories. And this is where I get a very strong Europa Universalis vibe to this. So at the beginning of every turn, you're going to put cubes in these spaces, and there's 3 different kinds of actions. There's royal actions here with the yellow. Royal actions are going to be based on you just get 4 every turn. As the king, as Felipe of Spain, you're going to get 4 every turn. Government actions and political actions are going to be based on your prime minister. You can see here we've got 3 political actions and 2 government actions here. So, but we also get, because he is a industrious, we get a green cube, which can actually be used for political or government. I believe that's correct. I think this is political and this is government. I could have that backwards in any case, but your board will look something like this at the beginning of every turn. So when you draw the actions card, you then get to spend these cubes to take these actions, and you can only do 1 type of actions per actions round. And this is where it reminds me of Europa Universalis and a little bit of Mr. President. You've got all these options. They all affect the board or your court in some way, and you've got to decide what the strategy you're going for is. So you would spend a cube, you get 3 of them. Let's say maybe I did a royal action, and I did a political action, and then there's this category here called simple actions, which don't cost cubes, but you can only do 1, or it counts as one of your 3 actions. So let's say I did that, I'd put these off to the side, and then in future turns, or future action cards that I may or may not draw, I would get to take these actions. Now, you are at the mercy of the deck here, because there's only 7 of these action cards in the deck, and you may not get them, because sometimes you'll get an event. Let's flip the next one. So we've got Union of Arms. This is a special event that can happen twice in the game. I'm just going to try and find one. Instability. Yeah, you lose a ducat. I was unfortunately the victim of a lot of lose ducat events. This one, you lose money, and one of your notables in play chosen at random is just straight out eliminated. So that would be any of your nobles, any of your artists, any of your generals, and possibly your queen maybe, but also so generals, nobles, artists. And then there's a lot of chit drawing. So again, like Mr. President, there's a lot of cups with different chits. Here we've got children. Here we've got what happens, like randomly, what can happen on the continent. Here we've got piracy raids in the various colonies that Spain owns. And here we've got all the possible people in your court that you would draw from this. And based on the chit you draw, this is governed by who is on the board and who is here. Here's the other people, by the way. We at the beginning of the scenario, we assigned from our nobles, we assigned a viceroy of Italy. We assigned an ambassador to Austria. We assigned a governor of Flanders, and we assigned a viceroy of the Indies of the New World. In each of those roles, you use the character's stats to affect certain things you do in those regions and different actions you take. So all of those people are represented by a chit in this cup, and sometimes when you get events like instability, they might die or get removed, and so you draw randomly and see what happens. So there's a lot of variability for the storytelling. I'm trying to get to, okay, here we go. Anglo-Spanish War. Check the state of war with England. So there's a possibility that you go to war with England, and usually what will happen is you'll do a check. And so you can see that some of these cards have the different colored birds on the bottom. So anytime you need to do a check from an event, you'll just flip over another card from the top. So in this case, we got a neutral. So there's 3 levels of success. There's the gold eagle, which is a positive success. You want those. You've got the white neutral. Sometimes they do good things. Sometimes they do bad things. I don't know exactly in this instance whether the Anglo-Spanish War would trigger with a neutral, but the black crow is negative. So anytime you need to do a check and you get a black crow, it's usually bad for you. So there's no dice. It's just kind of randomly through the cards. And because you're flipping cards from the top of the deck, some events may be skipped because you're not going to necessarily play through this whole thing, or you're not going to play through it in the same order every time because of that event check sequence. So, we might play some more events. Here we get a free royal action. Not really sure what the history of this bearded lady is. Here we lose an action. And then some of these events as well, when you're resolving military campaigns against you, has this casualty marker. This is where you would lose units from a particular front in the war. As you can see, I've raised some provincial levies here in the 30 Years' War. Looks like probably Austrian soldiers. Here we've got some Spanish tercios and a fleet fighting in Flanders. We've also got these regional militia levies that we can raise inexpensively. And so you're constantly having to balance the stuff that's happening here. Again, very Mr. President. Like, you have all these nations and all this stuff going on in them, and you're trying to balance that with trying to expand the artistry of the Spanish court and be a cultural superpower and not go bankrupt, and make sure that the king has a happy time and he's earning prestige, and that your nobles are assigned to the right positions, because, you know, this guy's brave. And he's also an admiral here, so he would make a really good commander in a front if it opens up that has naval requirements. So, for example, if you're fighting the Ottomans here, they have a very weak army, but you must have a fleet there. And if you have a fleet and an admiral, you can get some bonuses depending on your troop makeup. And so you just keep flipping, and you just keep flipping. And the turns are kind of a variable length, because what happens is once you have resolved 5 cards that are either action cards or the total war card, then the turn is over. So you may draw 5 really fast, and you may not have a lot happen in any particular period, or you may have to go through the deck a whole ton to get to your actions and total war resolutions. So that's what happened here. And in my game, we played the first 5 years. We ended with 3 victory points, which is considered a failure for this scenario. And I probably made some bad choices, and I maybe didn't focus on the right things, but it was a good learning experience to learn how to play the game. I think I played it mostly right. I think one of the only things I forgot to do was at the end of the turn, you actually have to reshuffle all the events that have been flipped back into the deck for the end of turn checks for things. But as a loose chronology of what happened, we lost an artist pretty early to disease. We had the Danes, as I mentioned, intervene in the war, in the 30 Years' War here in the Palatinate. We had a lot of battles against the Dutch in Flanders, going back and forth. We managed to stabilize the front a little bit, bring it back down in this direction. I think if I was going to continue playing, I would probably send an ambassador to broker a truce there, especially if I did something like have the English suddenly pop into conflict. We got raided by pirates a bunch of times here in Brazil. So you can see each of these colonies gives you money at the end of every turn, potentially. We got raided in Brazil. We built a fortress here in the Philippines. This happened late in the turn after I had been raided a whole bunch. And I just figured it would be good to protect my investments over there. You also get prestige when you build forts, so it's useful to do that. We got raided in Mozambique. And so it was unlucky in the sense that I got raided a whole bunch where there were no fortresses. As you can see, here's Peru and New Spain. They both have fortresses intrinsically in their spaces. So if you build a fortress there, they upgrade to level 2, which is nice. Eventually, you want to try and do that. You just don't have enough resources to do everything you want all the time. Like I said, we had to declare bankruptcy at the end of the turn to keep our army, because you have to pay for your regional troops, these green ones, at the end of every turn, and I didn't have any money left at the end of the turn, so I had to pay to keep my army in the field in the 30 Years' War, and so I suffered some bankruptcy, which affects your next turn's income, so I only have, 4 ducats going into the next turn, which is really bad. I probably was going to come to a loss at the end of turn 2 anyway. I hadn't even started on my exploration yet. You can explore the new world, and as you do that, you have you explore the Amazon, and then you have a choice. Do you want to settle, Formosa or the Marianas in the Pacific, or do you want to, Formosa and Marianas in the Pacific? You lose money, but you're in victory points, or do you want to just continue on to the Pacific Ocean, and then that would lead you here to the circumnavigation, which is worth another victory point. So you can see there's kind of a lot going on here, but the mechanisms of play are really easy. Just flip events, wait until you get to your 5 that trigger the end of the turn. You do some end of turn analysis of how you performed, where you earn victory points, you potentially lose it, you earn money or potentially lose it. You've got a deck of artists you can patronize, a deck of nobles that can come into your court, and every turn you're going to add new cards to this, because there's a whole stack of cards for every turn for new people, historical people, to come into the game. And like I said, you're going to add new events to the event deck. So you're constantly in this state of like flux and change, and you really get a cool sense of the history. And if I set up this scenario again, I feel like it would play a lot differently just based on the event card pull. So there's a lot of variability in this game, which is kind of cool. And so if you like games like Mr. President or I, Napoleon, or even if you like Europa Universalis and wished you had something that was like a solo version of that, this is really giving me that feel because of the way the action system works and how you have to kind of like figure out what you're trying to prioritize. You're constantly trying to put out fires. And unlike Mr. President, where it's like a very modern feel in game, this does really give you a nice sense of sort of the period and the types of things that can happen and sort of the limitations of sort of this global empire in the Age of Discovery, which I think is really neat. You're constantly looking at, kind of like Crusader Kings, you have all these different people in your orbit that have different stats. You want to get them into the right spots. You want to get good keywords. You want to make sure that the high prestige, you're not sending high prestige guys out into the world to do stuff for you, because at the end of the turn, you score based on the prestige of people in your court. So who do you keep close to you? Who do you send out to do your business? A lot of decisions to weigh. I'm not a big fan of solo games a lot because the decision-making isn't very strong. But here, I think there's really solid decision-making to be made. And I can't wait to set this up and play it again. Play maybe a longer scenario. See if I can make it all 8 turns for the entire reign of Philip IV. I had a bastard daughter with my mistress, and then I had a legitimate daughter, and then I had a sickly. My first son was sickly, but he is currently the heir apparent. So I definitely don't want him to die. I got pretty lucky at the end in that he didn't pass away from being sick. So Balthazar of Spain. So yeah, that's a real quick look at what kind of transpired in this instance of Rey Planeta. Here we can see it looks like a commander who maybe left. I had this guy get exiled. I think this guy died of illness, from what I recall. There's just a bunch of stuff that can happen, and it's really cool. And this event deck has so many things. Rivalry here. Let's see if I can get that to focus. Yeah, randomly selected genius. That genius departs. Had that happen to me. There's just, it's a lot of cool stuff happening here. Patron, place a genius, get a free genius. So you can have good stuff happen to you, you can have bad stuff happen to you, and it's really how you respond to those things and the decisions that you make when it comes time to take your actions. It has a really nice push and pull. The game does stuff, then you get a chance to do stuff. Then the game does stuff, then you get a chance to do stuff. And it reminds me a lot of Mr. President in that way. And so if you like that game, you'd probably really like this game. Criticisms that I have. So first of all, while there are a nice number of player aids in the game to kind of learn, to get going, like right here, we've got all the actions. We've got the sequence of play here on the back that really kind of details every phase. We have got somewhere, where did I put it? Somewhere over here, there is here it is. It's in here. We have a reference sheet of all the actions and how you do them. The one thing I would say that's a little bit hard is that there is not a good reference for some of the special rules in the game. A lot of the cards have special rules, and then you have to go to the rules to look them up, and that's in every phase of the game. I wish that had been done a little better, and I wish there was a sort of a player aid that was a reminder of like easy to miss rules. Things that you can only do once a turn. When you take government actions, you can actually only do one like if you take a government action, like a military campaign, or like let's say raise tercio, you actually can't raise tercios again for the entire 5-year period. So the only government action you can do twice is military campaign, and even then you can only do it in different wars. So I wish there was like a reminder of that. I wish there was a reminder if we go to the rule book. I wish there was a reminder for all of the end of turn stuff or the special rules here. Like there's special rules about this particular leader. There's special rules about, there's actually a couple different special leader things that happen. And then at the end of the turn, there's like, for example, how you calculate happiness, right? How you calculate prestige, how you calculate the enlightenment points. I wish there was a player aid that had that on it so I didn't have to flip open the rules every turn to make sure I wasn't forgetting any of these particular conditions. I think that could have been more well done, I feel like. And then also like how you collect money and like under what conditions you collect money and how much money you're allowed to get from your colonies. Like it's not just the value printed on the board, it's based on who's the governor here. So there's just stuff like that, or like the children, like like this V means it's an heir. It can be an heir because it's a son, but sometimes you might forget that when you're placing it on the board down here. How uprisings work. Like there's just a lot of stuff that needed a reference. And I think it could have all fit on one page. I think if they had just made one more player aid in this game to remind you of some of those easy to forget rules that are just kind of buried in the text, I think it would have been a much more playable game. As it is, I didn't have too much trouble with it. I kind of played with the rules out as I was going, but it's pretty easy to figure out. And I think once you do it a couple times, it'll start to make sense. But I just think there are some rough edges that could have been smoothed out a little bit. And I actually found the rules to be pretty good. The errata there is some errata, but it's not too bad. So, some of the rule book text is significantly important that it changes, but it's usually just like one sentence. And once you do it a couple times, you'll get it, right? And as long as you have this in front of you, you'll kind of remember. The counters, the turn of entry for some of the leader counters is unfortunate on the back side of them, but I didn't get far enough to encounter that. There is one, I think the major point of errata is this action card. So like I said, there are 8 action cards in the game, and unless you read the rules very carefully, you might be tempted to put them all into the deck. And the reason for that is because they all don't have a turn number, and you're supposed to always use all the cards with no turn number. However, there is one action card that is highly dependent on some other event that gets played, and it mistakenly was printed without the question mark symbol. So you're definitely going to have to take out one of the action cards. I think it's number 14 from the deck, and either mark it with like a pen or sleeve it and put a sticker or something that will let you know that that card is only supposed to come into play after something happens. So that's like the biggest errata I found. But the rulebook was actually pretty good from an English perspective. There were a couple things, a couple typos, but I didn't find any of it hard to understand. They do use some terminology kind of loosely. That's, if you use some common sense, it's pretty easy to figure out. But it is not really tight from a language standpoint in terms of defining what on the, like what piece you're supposed to use, or on the board what that specific condition is called. They use a couple different terms for a couple different things in different ways, but it's pretty easy to figure out. So it's not like the perfect game, but I would say that it is pretty enjoyable, and I'm really looking forward to playing this again and seeing how my next playthrough is going to be different and how far I can take it. So again, like I said, if you're interested in solo games and you want something that kind of scratches the itch of Mr. President or I, Napoleon, Rey Planeta is pretty impressive to me, I would say. Well, just as a quick compare and contrast, I actually started up a second game. I was going to see how far I can get in the full campaign scenario. And I played the first turn again. It was far more eventful than the last one. It took me forever to get through the events deck and to get the 5 action or global war cards. I actually went through the deck almost 2 times to get that to happen. So we had a lot of activity. And as it turned out, it was extremely deadly to be in the Spanish court this turn. So many deaths from disease, from instability. I got some new events I hadn't seen yet, but all of these people died or were eliminated for some reason or another. So we have very few nobles left. Our court is very small. We got Castel Rodrigo, who we had in the first game. He came out last. We've got a couple of writers, which is great. And then we've got some generals who are of varying quality, and I managed to refill all of the governorship positions on the board just barely. But it was most of that turn was spent just doing damage control. We actually did go to war with Britain. Here, as you can see, I've moved the Spanish Navy to fight the English. They got a pretty bad commander, so I'm hoping I can beat this war. I had moved it up to here, and I was hoping that in the next turn I was going to win it, but unfortunately they attacked me near the end and moved it back. I got raided again in the Philippines and Mozambique. We're going to have to try and fix that because I'm not, well, it's not dire if I don't fix that, but at some point I will stop earning income. I did build a level 2 fort in New Spain. That makes it generate 3 coins per turn, so that's a pretty rich take there. And this guy's a pretty good viceroy of the Indies with 2, so he can return 2 coins per turn. What else happened that turn? I did end with 3 victory points again. So we're off to a similar start. I did get a successful exploration, and I managed to dodge war with France and the Ottomans and the Barbary pirates through that turn, which is actually very helpful. The war started to explode on me, and I was really nervous about what was going to happen, that it was going to be a quick game, but we managed to put down a rebellion in Flanders. We built some new units. And I'm going into turn 2, so we will see some new cards that I haven't seen before. And the one thing I would say on this play is that it is possible to get into a loop where you're going through the event deck without getting one of those action cards that you need, and you're just kind of suffering some consequences over and over. So the game can be a little swingy in that regard. You may be just going through a series of horrible disasters one after the other and just not being able to get the flop out that you need. So you just got to roll with it, right? It's a narrative engine game. You're not trying to play to be the best at it. I mean, you can be good, but like a lot of the time you're at the whims of kind of like what the game is going to throw at you, such as all of my fatalities there. So yeah, I'm just taking it as it goes, enjoying the experience, seeing how this differs. But I never feel like it's unfair necessarily, or I haven't felt like it's unfair. I felt like when I do get my actions, I can do some things to kind of improve my position. So Oh yeah, I gotta flip this over. We did have a truce with the Dutch. We had a successful ambassador check there. So back to war with them. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this look at the game. I'm gonna continue playing it. I think it's pretty interesting and pretty cool. And I think if you like I Napoleon, I'm gonna say it one more time. If you like I Napoleon, if you played that and thought it was a cool game, I think you'll really love this. And as one final addendum to what I was kind of talking about with the game and kind of the difficulty in finding information, so I did it wrong, it turns out. So if we look at the sequence of play, you can see that in the event phase ends when the events deck is exhausted or when 5 actions and total war cards have been played as events. So if you actually exhaust the events deck, that also ends the turn. So I actually did go longer than I was supposed to for that turn, unfortunately. But you live, you learn. I did get some good stuff in the second half of it, so I'm just going to say that it was, we'll call it a wash. But yeah, you only go through the deck once per turn, so it should have ended after that first go through. Just wanted to point that out because I know some of you who have played this would probably tell me in the comments.